Good morning and welcome to church. Today we start a brand new collection of talks where we begin a process where we will be walking towards the Christmas season. But you're thinking, hold on, September, why in the world would we be talking about Christmas already? Well, here at Foundation, we believe on very intentional on-ramps. And so everything that we're going to be walking through over the next coming weeks to walk us towards the Christmas season, the hope is that it prepares us for the greatest Christmas season we've ever experienced. Not just as a church, but you, as a human being. And we believe that can require some preparation. And it begins with what we're going to start talking about today. There's actually some pretty heavy lifting that needs to happen in the coming weeks, and we're going to take it one chunk at a time, piece by piece, because we have a vision for what Christmas could be. If you are new to faith and new to church, I just want to let you know that you have found yourself amongst a group of people who want to follow Jesus with everything that they have, but are very transparent about our inability to do so as often as we would like. And we attempt to be the first to admit when we have strayed from what Jesus desires for us. But sometimes we're not even good at apologizing. We're not great at recognizing those moments. And so as you hang out and are part of what's happening today, just know you have found yourself in a group of very imperfect people. However, you have also found yourself amongst a group of people that have a hope in a historical, resurrected Jesus. And he was so significant, we would attempt to give him every piece and part of our life. If that's not you this morning, it's all right. This is a place for you to ask really difficult questions, for you to doubt, and to explore and discover an answer to that question I believe everyone deserves an answer to. Is Jesus really who he says he is? So if you're new to faith or new to church, welcome to church. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to jump into our Bible study time. Would you pray with me? Father, we are grateful for the morning that's in front of us, the first of which, as we begin to march towards the Christmas season, one of the highlights of our year. But Father, we acknowledge that there's a possibility we would have a bit of work to do, that we could be a little more intentional in preparing. And so as we begin this on-ramp today, would you guide our thoughts and the feelings that accompany them, that it might lead us in a direction that looks more like where you want us to arrive. So Father, as we open your word, we ask for clarity, that we would understand what we read and how it applies to who we are today. And we also ask for courage to do something about what we might become clear on. We ask for these two things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. It is football season. Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Joey's pumped. What time's the game start? 1. I will be out of here pretty close. It'll be good. Are we coming to your house? It's on TV. Okay, great. Yeah. All you can eat wings at Joey's house. This is going to be great. All the things. Football season, that's important, I think. With football season, there are playbooks. You've probably seen, maybe if you're not a football person, there's a quarterback. He's the guy that holds the ball most of the time and sometimes throws it. In the Falcons' case, he's usually the guy that throws it to the other team. But he is a good shot. This is going to be different this year. We are about to do something incredible. It's going to be breathtaking to watch and experience, and it will happen. It will take place. I'm feeling good about the Falcons this year. And we'll find out in a couple hours if that feeling is just what I ate for breakfast or what. I don't know. We'll see. So for sure, it's football season. But you'll see the quarterback, he'll have on his arm sometimes this little thing and have some plays in it. And that references a playbook, right? References a playbook. And they'll call plays in, and then he'll run the play, right? And sometimes he'll have to check on the play. But if he doesn't check on it, that's fine. And he figures it out and runs it. Sometimes if his name is Peyton Manning, he'll say Omaha, those kind of things. He calls the play, and they run the playbook. So we're starting today 3 weeks on the idea of marriage. And I know you're probably wondering, what in the world does marriage have to do with Christmas? We'll get to it in a couple minutes. But the thing is, when we think through plays, I actually couldn't come up with a really great opener this week. And so I try to have decent openers. So I asked my friend ChatGPT if they would write me a joke to tell all of you about our marriage series. So I put in all the data for the marriage series and the playbook and marriage and all those things. And I said, hey, will you give me a joke? This is ChatGPT's joke. You ready? Why does the husband insist on taking his playbook to bed? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Because he thinks that's his best shot at scoring a touchdown. Speaking of touchdowns, that's what we're talking about next week. So if you have earmuffs, you might want to bring them. Not real touchdowns. Okay. I'm trying to give you 7 days heads up. You're welcome. Let's march towards Christmas. Marriage. I think if we're going to start here, and let me also say this. We talk about marriage a lot because one of our values is healthy families. We're not just going to talk about marriage for the next couple weeks, but over the whole piece of the fall as we march towards Christmas, there's a lot that we're going to be talking about. Marriage just happens to be the very first primary thing we need to speak on, address, and we're going to move out from there. We had a bunch of feedback from a Q&A series we did just after Easter where we didn't get to all of those answers. Some of those are coming this fall also. One of those is about what does the Bible have to say about singleness and what does that look like? And so we're going to address a number of things that lead us to this Christmas thing that I'm going to hopefully tie all together. We'll see how that works. But today, that's where we're starting is marriage. So if we're going to start here, I figured it's probably a good idea just to ask the question, where did it come from? How did we get to it? Where did this whole idea of marriage come from? Thankfully, there were some guys by the name of, we don't know their names, we have a title. They were religious leaders. They were really experts in the law. They were called Pharisees. And Pharisees decided they wanted to ask Jesus about marriage. And thankfully, there's a guy named Matthew. We do know his name. Matthew had the opportunity to write down his account of what he experienced and saw in terms of who Jesus was. And Matthew specifically wrote his little piece of the Bible, his book, which is called the Gospel of Matthew. He wrote it through the lens of a Jewish man experiencing a Jewish Christian revolution known as Jesus Christ. And so he writes his letter to say, hey, this is my experience as a Jewish guy, and I'm writing it through the lens of being a Jew to everyone else who he grew up with and people that were in his community. And he wanted them to experience Jesus the way he did, through a Jewish lens. And so he gets to write all these kind of stories and tell these moments, a lot of moments that happened inside of the Jewish culture. This is one of those conversations where Jewish legal scholars had come to have a conversation with a Jewish rabbi named Jesus, and he records the conversation, and it happens to be about marriage. This is what they say to Jesus. Some Pharisees came to him being Jesus, to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so the Pharisees come to Jesus to ask him about divorce. And Jesus immediately points them to Genesis. which is interesting, I think. And now, to give you a little background of why they're having a conversation with him about divorce, the role or the kind of the way that things worked in their particular context was if a guy wanted a divorce, he just had to get a piece of paper saying a certificate of divorce, and he just had to hand it to the lady. And I was like, hey, look, your chili wasn't good last night. Here is a certificate of divorce, and now we're done. And then he moves on with his life, right? That's the way it worked. A guy just had to give her a certificate of divorce. It didn't matter what the reason was. There was no one that's going to like, hey, we should mediate. Just, hey, here it is. Here's the certificate. I am finished. I'm moving on. You do whatever you need to do, but you have your little certificate. You can put it on the wall, whatever you want to do. That's the way it operated. And so Jesus begins to talk a little bit differently about marriage. And so the Pharisees think they've got Jesus. They're like, you know what? We don't think Jesus agrees with that happening in a relationship. Just like, here's a piece of paper, I'm moving on, right? For whatever reason. We don't think he agrees with that. So, but that's the way we work, right? That's the way our religion works. So let's see if we can catch him. Will he disagree with what our tradition has been? Is he going to do that publicly? Is he going to, in front of everyone, kind of put down the law of Moses, right? Or is he going to say, well, you know, when I was talking about marriage earlier, it wasn't that serious, you know what I'm saying? I mean, just get the piece of paper and you do the thing, right? So they thought they had him. And so they come and ask him and say, hey, so is it okay if a guy just divorces his wife for whatever reason? Now, Jesus answers their question, but he doesn't give them a yes or no. Instead, he points to a better answer. They wanted an answer from him. He said, you know what? Honestly, this is roundabout what he's saying. I could give you an answer, but let me not answer the question. Let God answer the question. Why don't we just ask God? And then he not only references what God says about marriage, he also references it in a book written by the guy they're trying to trip him up on his laws, a guy named Moses. Moses wrote the book of Genesis. So not only is he going to reference what God thinks about marriage, he's going to reference it in a book of the guy who wrote the rest of the law. And so he's saying, hey, here's the deal. You don't want to know my answer. Why don't we look at what Moses wrote about what God said about marriage? Let them answer the question. And that's the way he answers. He says, haven't you read? Which is a silly question to ask a Pharisee, because not only had they read, they had memorized the entirety of the first 5 books of what we know as the Bible by memory. He says, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. He says, you don't want my answer. And how could I get a better answer than what God said and Moses wrote? Now, what's interesting is that the word marriage actually isn't in that little Genesis section, but Jesus points to it as this is what marriage is. In fact, that description in Genesis is recording the marriage of Adam and Eve, though it doesn't have what we would typically think through as marriage, because there wasn't a photographer following them around for 8 hours, filming them getting ready. There wasn't, a DJ afterwards doing the electric slide. There wasn't those things. There wasn't a unity candle, right? Or one of those ropes you'd tie in a little knot thingamajigger. Like, there wasn't those things. As in terms of how there was no wedding cake. I don't know. There was maybe like a wedding pear. I don't know. They had fruit on trees. I don't know. But there's none of that. So the idea of what we think through as marriage is not going to show up. But Jesus clearly points to, you want to talk about divorce and marriage? Let me talk about the very first thing and why it was so significant to God. In other words, Jesus believes that marriage is God's invention. And if God created it, right? If God created it, he must know something about it. So then let's ask the next question. If he knows so much about it, has he set any expectations for it? Well, here's a few. So if you want to go in depth on these that I'm going to fly through here, I'm just creating a little foundation for us to get to the actual piece of what I want to talk about. We did a message series about 18 months ago where I spent a lot of time on what I'm about to read. You can go back and read and walk through those things if you're like, man, I really want to dig in on this. I'm not going to dig into it. I'm just going to read through it quickly for you. It's in the book of Ephesians, it says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's talking about spouses, right? Husband and wife. You should submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, what's interesting is it says, hey, I want both of you to submit to one another, mutual submission towards one another. But here's the important part. The submission is not the important part. The important part is out of reverence for Christ. In other words, we're not submitting to one another based upon what our spouse did for us, or how they've treated us, or whether or not they're having a good day or a good week. I'm making a decision. I will submit towards my spouse because of the way I respect and esteem and uphold who Jesus is. Now that's really, that's a big deal, because honestly, we don't enjoy submitting for those reasons. We want to submit because it's convenient, or it's honestly, we know this is what's best for us. Even though I don't want to do it, I know in the end, he or she knows what they're talking about, right? Like those are things, it's like, okay, we can get to submission. But there are moments when, honestly, our spouse do not deserve to be submitted to because they don't deserve it, right? You got a list of things you're probably thinking about. Oh, that one time, right? Yeah, that one time. And then a million others, right? Like they've earned the right not to be submitted to. Probably a million times over. But for some reason, he says, hey, I want you to submit to one another, not based upon anything they've done, but because of how much you respect and admire Jesus. Could we then say that whether or not you have the ability to submit to your spouse is a direct reflection of how much you admire or don't admire Jesus? That's a big question. So that's across the board. Hey, this is both. Paul then goes into some individual expectations. He wants to talk specifically to wives, specifically to husbands. Let's start with the wives, ladies first. Here we go. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their own husbands in everything. Now, this is the problem, because we just covered submission and the mutual submission thing just a couple verses earlier. And now, for some reason, the biblical author is doubling down, not to husbands, but to wives. He's saying, hey, look, y'all submit to one another based upon how much you respect Jesus. And now we're moving on. Ladies, I need you to give a little extra on the submission. Here we go, a little extra on submission, and it doesn't give us an explanation for why they double down to wives. It's specifically on submission, which, here's the deal. My guess is, based upon how I've gotten to know people in our community around the world, is that sometimes submission is probably the biggest thing that ladies deal with. Like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't feel comfortable. It feels very old school to submit myself to a man. Like, I just don't think I can do it. And it's almost like the biblical author knew what ladies would struggle with, and he said, let me repeat this again so that you hear it. Which I start with ladies first, is I'm very dangerous right now. I know there's probably weapons in your purse. Keep them there. Right? I'm about to move on to guys. They get it too, okay? Just as we're starting there because I can end on a high note for you ladies. Not only does he double down on submission, he actually gives you a word picture. He gives you a vision of what the submission ought to look like. He says, I don't want you just to submit. I want you to submit the way the church submits to Jesus. Now, I know that's also dangerous to say because there's probably some churches that don't do a lot of submitting to Jesus. But I think you can recognize when church is and when church isn't. And so we won't let that be an excuse for improper or poor submission. We have the ability to see if Jesus is in the lead or not for a church. He's saying, hey, I want you to submit to your husband the way a healthy church would submit to Jesus. But husbands aren't off the hook. In fact, goodness, husbands go a little further. It goes a little further. At least it feels that way. When I'm reading it, I was like, good gracious alive. Can we tone it down a little bit? Can we let me off the hook just a tad? The very next verse, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, what's interesting is that nowhere in the passage does it say, oh, by the way, ladies, women, you need to love your husband. It doesn't do that. It only doubles down on the love thing for husbands. And it's like, well, hold on. Of course I'm gonna love my wife. Of course I am. I love her. She's lovely. She's lovable. I love her, right? I love her. But he also, they know, here's the deal. Husbands are going to struggle. They're going to struggle with this, so they also get a word picture, right? They also get a word picture. Not only do I want you to love your wife, I want you to love your wife this way. As Christ, or Jesus, as Jesus loved the church and gave himself up for her. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you already know what that looks like. You see it in your head. It's Jesus on a cross. Right? It's Jesus on a cross. That's the way he gave himself up for her. Now, I think the truth is that the author knew where husbands would struggle a ton. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be a generalized, overgeneralized statement. For sure, there's exceptions. I'm just sharing with you the majority of the times I have conversations with couples, this is the experience that I have, whether it's couples that are in crisis or couples in general, when we have conversations, or it's premarital conversations that I'm having with couples as they're preparing to walk towards marriage. This is generally, again, there's exceptions, so don't tweet me, X me, whatever that new company's name. Don't do those things and be like, but me. Right, I got you. There's exceptions. Overwhelming, though, what I have found is that men in a relationship struggle with giving up their greatest passions for anybody else, including their spouse. Anybody else, including their spouse. But that's what the picture we have. That's the picture we have. He's saying, hey, here's the deal. If it comes down to career and spouse, if that's the option, well, then there's not a choice. Then the career goes to the cross. If fill in the blank, whatever it is, whatever ambition you've got. When we think through for sicker or sickness and health, right? Here's the deal. For those of you who are enormously ambitious, right, fellas, when sicker happens, right, sickness happens, you don't have the ability or the time or the energy to continue to pursue your dreams and passions and all those things and be 100% what sickness is needing, right? And some of you know who have spouses that walk through just enormous sickness, long, extended sickness. Like you can't go and pursue all the things and still be the husband that she needs. So what goes to the cross? Sickness go to the cross? Your wife go to the cross? Or dreams and aspirations and drive for this achievement, for this role, for this company? Something's going to the cross. You see, throughout the biblical narrative, we find a common theme. One scholar put it this way. I want to read you this quote. It is God's faithfulness to his people that allows us to understand the permanent and comprehensive union that is marriage. In other words, when we begin to look at the entire biblical narrative, from the very beginning of the Bible to the very end, what we see over and over and over again is that marriage is connected enormously to the way God is connected to his people. And he wants us to understand marriage in that context. For some reason, and maybe we can ask him when we get there, marriage is crazy important to God. It's the very first thing we see when people step onto the stage in Genesis. It's the very last thing that's talked about in Revelation when the bridegroom returns for his bride. And everything in between is looking at and pointing towards marriage. And so you want to know, why do we need to talk about marriage, to talk about the greatest Christmas ever? Because if you have the worst marriage ever, there's zero chance you're ever having the greatest Christmas ever. And the truth is, if you could figure out a way to have the greatest marriage you've ever had, you will have the greatest Christmas you've ever had. And it just starts here. It runs through the entire biblical narrative, and marriage seeps out and leaks out into every piece and part of our community. There's a problem, though. There's a problem. And the problem is what the whole point of our talk today is. And this is where it's going to get dangerous, because I'm going to make a point to you, and then I'm going to give you all the responses I've ever gotten for why that point is wrong. And these responses are not just theological thoughts. They are people that have sat across from me in my office and said, but what if this? So here we go. There seems to be some clarity on this one single point I want to make today. And I want to thread it from beginning to end throughout that narrative I was just talking about. See if you hear something common in all three of these passages I read. The first one was written by Moses, number 1,000 years before Jesus ever showed up. This is what he says. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Fast forward a number of 1,000 years. This is a guy named Jesus. This is what he says. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And then we fast forward a couple of decades, and there's a guy named Paul who's a church planter. This is what he says. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. What's the theme that spans thousands and thousands and thousands of years, multiple continents, multiple languages? What's the theme? Marriage, one flesh. Two become one flesh. And it's threaded throughout the entirety of the Bible. What is one flesh? Well, in a marriage book, you might see it written as this. It's the binding of hearts and the melding of souls. That's more like a pirate. I don't know. Pirates. Anybody like chili? Oh, hey, me and Lori. That's right, chili. Chili, I love chili. It's about chili season, you know what I'm saying? Like as soon as the leaves turn a little bit, it's chili season. I'm a chili fan. Here's the deal. If you like sweet chili, raise your hand and then exit that way. Okay, sweet chili is not chili. It's like cereal, so that's no good. Also, to make sure we're on the same page, beans belong in chili. So those of you who do not put beans in chili, you don't have to leave right now, but I'm not sure you want to come back. I'm sure at some point we'll do some kind of, who knows, chili cook-off. Probably not, but you never know. Here's the thing. With chili, this is what I found. And maybe not for you, but for me, in my experience, and then everyone else who's saying, this is the way chili works. You make chili, but it's really good the next day. You know what I'm saying? Like it's good day one, but then the next day, you go reheating it, and all of a sudden, the melding of things, you know what I'm saying? Like them things, all of a sudden, the juices kind of mixed together, started getting all scrambled up, you know what I'm saying? Them beans touching meat and all that kind of stuff is happening. Yeah, we're talking about sex. That's what's happening. And man, it is so good, you know what I'm saying? Because when you get all those things together, squishing around, like that is good stuff. You know what I'm saying? And the longer you do it, better it is. We're talking about chili. It's not that funny, okay? All right? The two become one flesh. What does that look like practically? Here's the controversial part. Let's think through a list, like a list of priorities, right? Let's think through a list of priorities. I think, yep. Sweet sauce. This is good. So let's think through a list of priorities. I'll try to move this out of the way a little bit. So I know the way our room is set up, this is not viewable by everybody. I'm going to do my best I can. I'm going to make a list of priorities. The 9 o'clock, it was a little difficult, I think, for people to see, so I decided to do it actually visually. So here's the thing. When we have a list of priorities, right, and we come up here and we say, that says priorities, okay? All right? So we have number 1. If you're a follower of Jesus, right, if you're a follower of Jesus, the number 1 says something like this. God, faith, Jesus, right? That's the way a priority list looks. If you're a follower of Jesus, that's what goes first. Okay, so here's the deal, though. All right, so that's a given. I'll pick that up later. That's a given because here's the truth. Here's the way God works. God isn't just a priority on a list, right? He's the one who gives you the list, right? So if we're making the list, then we put God up here. Say, okay, we're going to put God there. But the truth is, if you're a follower of Jesus, we're not making the list. We're asking God. We're saying, hey, you know what? I want to submit to you. You give me the list. And the truth is that when we make a really good priority list, no matter what's here, Jesus is going to be a part of that. And no matter what's here, Jesus is going to be a part of that. And here, and you get the thing. How do you do those things? There you go. Boom. Same thing all the way down. Not the same as 4. That's a 5. Okay. Got it. Right? So no matter where you're at on your list, Jesus is a significant part of it. So when we make the list, that's what we like to do. Okay, we got to compartmentalize God. He's number 1. And then I'm going to move into whatever number 2 is, number 3 is. And he's like, no. If you're going to let me make the list, let me just tell you, I'm in every single one of your numbers. And no matter what goes here, I am a central part of all of those things, right? So that's a given. That's the way we make priority lists as followers of Jesus. Okay, so we might have job. We might have spouse. Might have kids. Hobbies. Anything else? Family. We're going to say family is not like spouse or kids. They are, but they're not. You don't see what I'm saying, right? So that's what we're going to do, right? Now here's the deal. This is the way this works. If God is actually our God, right? If God is actually our God. Now when I say if God's our God, I mean God of the Bible, Jesus Christ, Son of God, the Spirit of God. If that is who we want to be our God, if we have said, hey, that's who we're going to follow, that's who we're going to give our life to. If God is actually our God, our spouse will not be just a priority. They will be our first priority, right? They will be. If, and that's a big thing. If the God of the Bible is your God, our spouse will be our first priority. Now, if that's not you, if you're like, hey, I'm not sure I believe in Jesus. I'm not sure that I believe in the cross and the resurrection. I'm still trying to figure this whole thing out. This is a great place for you to do that, right? There's no rush on my end for you to hurry up. You need to decide today, right? Right? I mean, I think you should explore and discover the question. But I'm talking to those of you who are Jesus followers. If you're going to say, I give every piece and part of my life to Jesus, then his list is not going to have this right here any other place but here. I don't need this part anymore. When we think through priorities and we put our spouse at the top, we get some issues. Like I said, what I just said was the controversial thing that gets me a lot of weird looks from people that sit in my office. Because it always starts with, hey, there's a biblical reason that this whole idea of the spouse comes first. Again, with the assumption that God is in every single part of our list, right? We don't just relegate him just to the top spot. He's in all of them. But if our spouse is our number one, almost always the people sitting across from me will say, well, what about if? But what if? Right? Let me give you an example of when maybe this isn't the case. Right? Here's a few of the what ifs that we probably need to talk through. But what if my career needs me more right now, but it's just a short period of time? Like, what if my career needs me more right now, but it's a short period of time? I would give you an answer. I'll give you a biblical answer. Your spouse matters more. Now, how does that practically play out? I don't know. I think it's very unique to your situation. But what I do know is that we don't take our spouse and sit them on a shelf and say, I'll come back and visit you later. Like, there's got to be a conversation that says, how do I keep you number one and pursue and give whatever my career needs from me? Now, we're not talking about like, hey, okay, this Thursday, I need to stay late, right? And we're not talking about these individual, we're talking about general specific periods of time, enormous seasons of life. We would say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to shelve my number one priority. Like, to be honest with you, I am better when she or he is my priority. And so if you think you need more of me, you actually need the best of me. And you only get the best of me if I have put my spouse in the very best place they should be. And so you might get more of me, but you're actually getting less of me because you're not getting all of me. Another what if we say, well, what if I've got like immediate family and we're super close, right? You're like, man, I'm really close to my parents or my brothers and sisters, and I've known them my whole life, right? And I've been a part of them my whole life, and we're a super close-knit family, and they don't come from a close-knit family, so they don't really know what it's like to have this kind of, like, they don't know, right? And so here's the answer. Here's the answer to that question. Spouse matters more. Or what if it's, well, we got kids now, right? And kids are super important. Those little ankle biters, they need a lot. They need a lot. They poop everywhere. They will poop like just in the kitchen, And as they get older, they make it sometimes to other places, but they start off just wherever they want. Like, that takes a lot of attention. Honestly, the truth is that we make it to where they can't reach into the cabinets. And so if I didn't feed them, they would starve. Like, I actually have to physically keep these people alive. It's ridiculous, And so in those moments, it's like, well, goodness, my kids are a gift from God, right? Like, if God didn't want me to focus on it, he wouldn't have given them to me. Like, he wants me to take them and raise them and make sure they become fully productive citizens and all those things. Yeah, I think all those things are true. But there's no biblical reason you get to put your spouse on the shelf for 18 years and come back and visit them later. Here's your answer. Spouse matters more. Or maybe it's, hey, I'm actually in my second marriage, and I brought kids with me to this marriage. And the truth is, like, I want them to be incredible stepdad or stepmom. I want them to be incredible. I want them to love my kids like they're their own kids. But in the back of my head, it's like, but I'm still their mom. I'm still their dad. And so they've already been through enough. I can't expose them to another opportunity. Like, I can't be that vulnerable and let ourselves be. Like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, I've got to think about the kids that got first. No, what you need to think about is don't freaking get in a relationship with someone you've got to think about that about. Like, just be more patient and wait for someone who's going to look at your kids with eyes like they're their kids also, and treat them in a way that they should be treated like God would want them to be treated. Like, just slow down a little bit, and you make sure that the person you're going to get married to, again, is the right person. That it's not just the person that makes you feel good, but you realize it's your responsibility not to protect them once you got in the marriage, but you protect them from the marriage to begin with. So slow your roll. Don't use them as an excuse later to not give everything you've got to your spouse, because the truth is, when you marry, whether it's their first time or second time or third time, it's time to get it right now. Because for whatever reason, the last one ended. And maybe it was your fault, or maybe it was their fault, or maybe it was both your fault. I don't know, but there's nothing you can do about that now. What you can do about it is walk forward the way God wants you to right now. And it's never too late for right now. And so here's the truth. Here's your answer to that question of what if. Your spouse matters more. Or I hear this. But Clint, what if I'm not their priority? Like, I know we're supposed to be each other's priority, but what if I'm not their priority? What do I do then? Well, in a fair world, it's mutual, right? You both start at the same time, both give equally, both show up every day. Superstars. Marriage superstars. In the real world, there's always a catalyst and there's always a follower. And it's not like the movies where you looked across the room and sparks fly and an orchestra begins, and it was like, and I knew sickness and health with you. I mean, not actually with you, but it's just saying, you know what I'm saying? My wife's over, it's right there, here she is. Sickness and health with you. See? For sure, Brooke knew the first time she saw me. Is that right? She didn't. She doesn't remember the first time she saw me because I was forgettable. I do remember the first time I saw her. She was wearing a yellow spaghetti strap, little tank top thing. We were at a camp. I was sitting in the back of a truck holding a guitar and a case, and I was like, good gracious alive, look at that girl. And I tried to make a good first impression. It didn't work. Somebody asked her a couple years later, so how did y'all meet? And I started with one story, she started with another, and I was like, wait a second. She was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You were there! I don't remember that. I remember every detail. She had a barbecue stain on her white t-shirt. I was just kidding. That's just not the way it works. There's a catalyst, there's a follower. And the way relationships works is sometimes you're the catalyst and sometimes you're the follower. And there are some seasons where you'll be a catalyst for an extended period of time. Probably it'll feel like an unfair period of time. It's like, man, I'm tired of being the person who goes first. I get that. But even in those seasons, here's your answer. Your spouse matters more. Now, I will tell you this, though. If you find yourself in an extended season of you being the catalyst, let that also be a moment of permission for you to say, you know what, maybe we should reach out and talk to someone. Because there is something happening there. If you're just season after season after season being the catalyst, something's there. And most often it's something to do with some kind of miscommunication in sometimes a significant way, or sometimes it's just people don't even realize that they're just constantly being the follower. They just think, this is kind of nice. And they don't realize that it's not really nice for the other half. And so that can be a permission place for you to say, hey, let's get a marriage checkup. Let's go challenge ourselves and see how we're doing. Let's just see. Let's see if we're getting better. Because I feel like we could get better at what we do. I wanted to give you something really practical, because what I didn't want was to start our march towards Christmas thinking through the lens of marriage first, because I believe it's so foundational to everything that happens in our community, right? It's just an enormous centerpiece for so many things that happen in our community. I didn't want to start that with just like, hey, at the end we're going to walk out and feel good about that 3 words, right? Spouse matters more, right? And okay, we can remember that. And maybe I'm going to put it on a sticky note, or maybe one of you are going to get it tattooed. I don't know. It's probably that cool. I don't know. Maybe not. So for sure, like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to give you something super practical, because I think marriage is an enormously practical thing. Sometimes we can blow it up into this big love and feeling thing, but it's just day after day, right? It's a grind, and it's okay. It's a grind, and it's just one thing after another. So I want to give you some practical advice. There's an organization that I think is really great. It's called WindShape, and you might have heard of it. They do camps. It was started by the Cathys, that are also the folks that started Chick-fil-A. And it's an incredible foundation. And they do incredible work with marriage. And they've got a place here in Georgia, just north and west of us a little bit, where they host marriage retreats. And they do incredible work. And so they've got this little blog that runs where they've got some marriage advice, and they'll do these little small things. And I came across this as I was just looking into a few things. And I was like, man, this is really good. I want to share it with everyone. And what they did is they just kind of put like a small little list together, one for husbands and one for wives, 10 things that you can do to be a better husband, 10 things you can do to be a better wife. And I wanted to share that with you this morning. And so pull out your phones. We've got a QR code that we'll put on the screen, and you can scan it, and it's going to take you to the website. Now, I will also tell you this. And in addition to doing this, when you get home, spend some time on their website. They do some marriage retreats that are out of this world. They do retreats for couples that are in crisis. They do retreats for couples that are like, hey, let's spark the flame kind of thing. They do some of those. They do some just like, hey, just rest and renewal retreats, all centered around the idea of Jesus, right? Like Jesus weaves through who they are as an organization. And so for sure, what you want to do is take this, and it's going to give you that list of 10 things. And this is what I want to make sure you do. I don't want you trying to figure out all 10 things. Just try like one. And this is the way I kind of see this going. So like at lunch today or this afternoon on a car ride, maybe you're reading the list or whatever. So what I would like for you to do is just say, maybe just extend the opportunity to say, hey, why don't you read the list for me? And what's one thing you think I should work on? Like, of those 10 things, is there one of these things that you think, hey, I should do this, right? And now you've got to be careful how you respond to that. Don't respond too quickly. Oh, number 4 for sure for you, right? Oh, hands down, I already read your list. Number 1, don't tell them you already read your list. If you scanned the opposite spouse's list, that's a red flag. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't wait to send them this. I'm going to send them this highlighted every single day because I love them and I want to remind them, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. You know what I'm saying? So you just have the conversation, right? So if that olive branch, if it's extended, like, hey, which one do you think I should work on? And if they don't ask you, well, don't volunteer. Like, don't say, hey, have you looked at number 3, by the way? Did you get a chance to read that list? If anything, maybe that's your cue to say, hey, I was reading my list, and I think I could probably work on this one a little better, but I'd love to hear your feedback. Is there one I should focus on more than this? Marriage is work. I want you to do me one last thing. Everybody close your eyes. And I want you to picture with me, if you're married, I want you to picture your marriage. If you're not married, I want you to picture the marriage of the people that mean the most to you, right? Like who are the people that mean absolutely the most to you? Picture their marriage. And now I want you to picture the marriage that's in your head having the greatest Christmas they've ever had. What does that look like? What would have to be true for that to take place? What would have to be a reality for that to become a reality? You see, my prayer is that what you see in the vision in your head would become what you see with your own eyes. But to get there takes work. It takes a lot of submission. It takes an enormous amount of love. You open your eyes.